Hey everybody, it's us again. And so today what we're going to be doing is we're going to be doing an office mod conversion for our toy hauler space. And we've actually already done a couple of modifications back here. Mainly the big one is we took out one of the seats because we have a phenomenal dog who has figured out how to open up doors, because she figured out how to basically open the door and just get away every time, which was interesting because we've never actually had to have a dog cage before, and we bought our first one, she escaped. Long story short, we ended up getting the Fort Knox of dog cages. And one of the cool parts about this is, with these trying times with the COVID epidemic going on, we're both working from home full-time right now, and what we have is we have a pretty unique setup in there with our table, but it is also taken away from where we eat breakfast together and whatnot. And we're tired of basically having to clean up just to eat breakfast, just to eat dinner, and then reset back up for our office work throughout the day. One of the other reasons we wanted to do this mod is that when we have guests over, for those of you that have a TH, a Toy Hauler series with Grand Design, when the bed comes down, it comes down to right about here, and then what happens is people use these ledges as drink holders. And we didn't like that because we don't want to tear this up. Basically, we're going to be running table the length all the way to right about here, to where when it's raised up, or the bed is down and these are raised up, they will actually have a side table for them to use, which should be pretty neat. We're excited to try it out. If you haven't seen Changing Lanes, they did something very similar. They're a great group. You absolutely need to watch them. I'm gonna give them a shout out because they actually influence us in even initiating our whole journey with living full time. And we're gonna show you how we use 2x6s. So come on, we're gonna show you how to take these seats off, and then we'll get to building. To take off these fold down seats is actually way simpler than you think. What you're gonna need is you're gonna need a 3/8 inch basically nut driver, and you're gonna take off 4 bolts, 1, 2, 3, 4 here. And it's going to be the exact same thing on the other side. And at that point, you are going to want to be ready to support it a little bit because it is top heavy. It's going to want to start to tilt down. But let's go ahead and work through this real quick, and we'll show you how easy it is. We're going to switch over to this because I don't have my extension immediately handy to take these off, but it really doesn't take any effort at all. Once you get to this point, it's actually a lot easier to take these off than most people realize, because they see cotter pins, big bolts, see all these bolts down along the side. The easiest thing I can tell you is you take out this top screw and this whole assembly will come off. Let me show you. So one little screw, just pick it up, pull it out. It's that simple. So the next thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to determine how long your desk is. If you're wanting to make just a personal desk, the space between here and here is actually only about 52 inches if you have a little bit of overhang. Now, as I said, what we wanted to do is we wanted, when this is raised up, to create a shelf for the bed above us. And so what we're going to do is we're going to actually make it 80 inches because we're going to measure from the top of the bed all the way over to right here, because we want it to come right flush next to this. In that case, it's going to be 81 inches for us. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to cut one board, and we're going to check and make sure that it will actually fit when this thing lifts up and down. So let's go do that. So one of the things that you have to think about when you're building your table is how the wood grain goes. And so what I did is I went to the end and I followed the lines of the wood grain and I alternated them, and that should help with warping over time. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take our board, or our first board, and we're going to give it a test cut. So we originally measured 81 inches. So we're going to make our measurement for 81 inches. And then what I like to do is on either side of the tape measure at 81, we're going to put a line. We're going to take our straight edge just draw straight along that line. And that way we have a straight cut when we start to cut. Another mistake lots of people make is they forget that this thing actually moves. Tighten that down. So now what we're going to do is just our quick test fit, see how things work, but I can't really determine that until I raise it up. We're going to try and line it up even with the bed. So in this case, the bed comes 4 inches or so from the edge, and we're going to make sure we're about 4 inches, so we're pretty good. Now if you come over here, we're also going to just do a quick hang of the tape measure to see what our depth between the board would be, and we got about 1 inch of space, which is exactly what we're going for. Not that it really much matters, but we do want to make sure if anything ever happens, if we have to raise the bed all the way up for any reason, this won't get in the way. One other tip that you're going to want to think about doing is, because we're going to be using a Craig pocket jig here in a little bit, is we're going to actually draw lines on either side of this board, and then we'll probably give it another inch of space on each side. So when we measure, and when we're drilling our Craig pocket jig holes, that we don't interfere with that, because this is actually, we're going to use those existing bolt holes that when we took the seat off, we're going to use the existing bolt holes to screw up into and secure this to the area. What you see here is we finished cutting all the rest of the boards to length, and then we measured out the spaces for our pocket holes, and then we drilled the pocket holes so that we could get ready to glue and screw them together.
This next step went by fairly quickly, in a matter of minutes. All we had to do was put wood glue on both sides of the boards that would end up touching each other and screw them in.
Next came the time-consuming part, which was sanding. We had to make sure that all of the boards were completely smooth and level with each other. And so after a couple of hours, we were ready to start with polyacrylic. Well, yesterday we ended up finishing the table, or so we thought. So we got it all sanded down, went and did a test fit before we were going to screw it in, and let's show you something that we ran into. When we originally measured, we thought that 4 boards of 6x2s would be perfect, and it ended up not being exactly what we wanted, which kind of stinks, because if you look, what you can see there is actually the tip of the actual seat mount sticking out. And so what we're going to do today is we're going to add 1 more board,
because we can use the extra space anyway, so it's not a loss at all.
And then what we're going to see is, if you can look right here, but there's this metal pole right here. And so what we're going to do is, once we get this in place, we're going to mark it, and then we're going to notch this out. So these boards will actually sit right about 1/4 of an inch or so away from the actual bars themselves. Hopefully it'll all fit and it'll work out. For us, we have to notch the grooves so it'll slide in on the supports. I've already started this one, but basically what we did is we lined it up, drew the lines, and then I used my straight edge to connect them, and then I measured with my tape measure. What I found to be 2 1/4 inches would be the perfect distance, and so that's what we're going to do. And then now we're going to cut, and the cutting is pretty straightforward. And what I'm doing now is I'm just going to cut angles, and I'll wiggle it, and it'll create a rounded effect, which Amanda can show you over there. And then next thing we got to do is we got to flip it over, because circular saws ironically cut in circles.
Woo! Huzzah!
I'm gonna take our tape measure, measure my 2 1/4 inches. Same thing. 2 1/4 inches. Draw a quick line for reference. Come over here, do the same thing. 2 1/4. 2 1/4. All right, and then take my straight edge, line it up to where I want my cut to be. Draw my line. Draw my line. The notches are going to look a little long initially, but that's because if you look, this tapers skinnier, and so we actually had to cut our notch for the base of it. But as you can see, what we'll do is we'll end up just pulling that out just a smidget when we go to screw it in. But we basically have a table. We ended up deciding not to go with a stain. Once we set it up, we let it sit for a night and took a look at it, and we ended up really liking the blonde wood look. And so the next thing that's going to happen right now is we're putting on a polyacrylic, and we'll put on quite a few layers of this throughout the day, assuming the weather stays nice for us. There's going to be good times, good times. There's going to be good times, good times. There's going to be good times, good times. I know there's going to be good times. 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 Good times, good times. So what we're going to do is we don't want the back of the board to sit right up against this track. And some people use spacers. I'm simple. I'm going to use a piece of cardboard as I slide this in. And once I get that slid into place, I'm just going to take the cardboard, set it on the ridge back there, and I'm not going to push it up in. I'm just going to let it just sort of sit there. So it should be able to
Just barely
move around. Do the same thing over here, because once we're in place, we're in place. So, and remember, you can always double check before you screw it in, but afterwards it makes it a little bit more of a challenge. And these do want to move around, as you can see underneath. And so I am going to check and make sure that they are centered with my cuts that are up here as well. Okay, so now we've reached the point where we're going to mount this table. It's pretty straightforward. I do have 2 drills here. Okay, I have my cordless drill with my screwdriver, or with my drill bit, and then I'm going to be using just a little lug adapter that allows me to put it into my corded screw bit onto an extension, and I'm going to be using a 7/16 head. The screws that we're going to use are just simple lag screws. I used 1/4 inch by about 1.5 inches, and they pretty much go straight in. You can put a washer on them. You don't really have to in this case. We're not going to. And so the process is pretty simple. It's rinse and repeat. We're gonna drill a pilot hole, and then remember, you don't want to go too far. So in my case, I'm gonna go just about as deep as the actual drill threads are on this, and I'm not gonna go any deeper. But pretty straightforward. I already drilled this first one, so we're gonna just go ahead and put the first one in, and then repeat. And the goal is not speed.
Sorry.
And then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to check and make sure that these aren't too tight, which you can see I can move them, so they're obviously not, there's not an issue there. I'm going to move over to this other side. I'm going to place one as well, because once I set a second screw in, it's pretty much in place. And so we're going to come over here, we're going to move that, it's pretty much the same. I'm going to drill my pilot hole, grab my next screw, and then we're going to repeat this process over and over and over.
So how I understand it is that he had to put that first screw in at this top corner or the left corner, and then here on the right hand side, because if he had drilled that whole first side down, then it could have put this side at an angle and just kind of scooched it over the further he went. So he wanted to make sure he had these first two in place so that it just kind of evens out as he goes.
The last thing that we're going to do is we're going to add a surge strip. So we had an extra surge strip lying around, pretty straightforward. One of the challenges that I've noticed that, or at least that I had in the past, was lining up these screws. I used to try and do all this weird voodoo basically to get it lined up, and if our printer was hooked up, we could just make a copy of the bottom of this. That's the easiest way. But if you don't have a copy capability with you wherever you are, you simply just set a piece of paper on. You literally can push where the holes would go. At the same time, once again, I'm trying to keep the paper flat, and I don't know how well that's going to come out.
It doesn't.
But what we can see, or if you want to, you can do it this way as well. We're going to line these back up to where I had them, or to where we wanted them. And then we just simply poke a hole. If you have your other screw handy, we're going to feel for it, and we're going to poke our hole. And then now, depending on which side you want to mount, and so in this case I'm going to mount it like this. So I'm going to keep this paper without flipping it over or anything, literally straight under and up, and then I can actually screw straight through this paper and just rip the paper off. So in my case, I'm going to line the edge of the paper up. I do want to leave a little bit of gap so that as cords hang, they come down, they have enough room to hang and move. And if you had it available, you could use tape, but this is such a quick process, you don't even have to use tape. There we go. Now we're ready to run our plugs. And here you guys have it. This is our finished product. This is actually what we're working on. Right now I'm currently making this video at this desk. Phenomenal choice. We love it. It opened up the room, gave us some space. Thanks for watching. And if you like this mod, hit the subscribe button and stay tuned. We're going to be doing some more modifications as we continue our journey.